We continue to have major breaking news out of the Donald Trump administration. All good news for the Second Amendment, and this is just the beginning, folks. We have a major announcement involving guns and our history involving firearms from the president himself. Major statement by Harmeet Dillon, the head of the Office of Civil Rights for the Department of Justice, and an amazing pro-Second Amendment statement directly from President Trump. Let's break all the stuff down. All good news, and the ball is rolling. Let's talk about it when we come back. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Box of Don, a proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and I'm proud to say the top voice of the Second Amendment in America. Thank you, 2025 Gundies Awards. All right, folks, so we have a lot of breaking news here involving the Trump administration and a lot of other things too. But in the last 24 hours, we've seen a lot of favorable things when it comes to preserving our fundamental human right to keep and bear arms, to protect ourselves and to preserve our lives in the name of self-defense against all forms of tyranny. And I want to just go through sort of three specific examples. We're starting to see this more and more every day. Favorable statements involving the right to keep and bear arms coming out of the Trump administration in all respects. And I think it makes sense to discuss all those items right here, right now, including the things that have just occurred. To begin with, obviously, there was a terrible shooting in Florida on the campus of Florida State University. The facts are still being sort of figured out. But the bottom line is, it's my understanding that under Florida law, you cannot carry guns on campus, even if you have a license. And, you've created a gun-free zone with the typical outcomes, going all the way back to the observations of criminologist Cesare Beccaria from Italy in the 18th century, who was very influential on the creation of the Second Amendment, written and supported by not only Thomas Jefferson, but also by John Adams, both of whom were quite familiar with the work and language and writings about the right to keep and bear arms and the stupidity and futility of gun control laws, specifically written by Cesare Beccaria, who laser focused and said that laws that prevent people from having arms do nothing to thwart criminals. If anything, you embolden criminals because now they know that ordinary law-abiding citizens are indeed unarmed victims waiting to be. Now, this is not an NRA slogan from the 21st century. This is literally Cesare Beccaria, an Italian Enlightenment philosopher from the 18th century, wrote those words before our America's founding and before the Second Amendment was even written. So this is well understood. And this is exactly what happened down there in Florida State, where again, unfortunately, you had a shooting by what appears to be a 20-year-old psycho nut job. Motive still being figured out, but it doesn't look very good. It doesn't look like he's pro-Trump or anything. He seems to be kind of anti-Trump, but again, those are all preliminary sort of observations from reporting. But he shot several individuals there at Florida State, a terrible tragedy. And again, if you make campuses gun-free zones, you're going to get nut jobs going to gun-free zones so they can, get as much exposure and rack up the kills and, rack up their numbers, which is what they want to do because they're mentally ill nut job psychopath terrorists. So with that said, Donald Trump was asked point blank by the press, what was he going to basically engage in any gun control legislation? And Donald Trump, in stark contrast to things he may have made comments about in the past involving like the Parkland shooting and the Vegas shooting during his first term, he had something much different to say, and it was unequivocal, and I think you should hear it right here.
Look, I'm a big advocate of the Second Amendment. I have been from the beginning. I protected it, and these things are terrible, but the gun doesn't do the shooting. The people do. It's, a phrase that's used probably too often. I will tell you that it's a shame. I'm just hearing about it now. I just hear about it. I know the area very well. I know the school very well. I know everything about it. It's Florida. And we'll have more to say about it later.
What do you mean when you say there will be more to say about it?
Only in terms of what happened. As far as legislation is concerned, this has been going on for a long time. I have an obligation to protect the Second Amendment. I ran on the Second Amendment, among many other things, and I will always protect the Second Amendment.
So obviously a very somber moment there in the White House. But with that said, Donald Trump recognized the obvious, which is when crazy people, psychopaths, terrorists, cartel members, evil people do evil things, taking away fundamental rights from ordinary law-abiding Americans has nothing to do with it, what these nut jobs do. And Donald Trump recognizes this. And I think, like I said, in the past, I think the Trump presidency, the second term, will be much stronger when it comes to our right to keep and bear arms than it was in the first term. I thought it was very good in the first term overall, but I think it will be much, much better this term. I think Donald Trump has learned a lot about the world of politics, which he still knew in his first term. Now he's much more savvy and understands sort of the way the political world flows. And again, it was very firm in his statement there that he has no intentions of supporting any kind of federal gun control legislation, nor should he. If anything, he needs to continue to encourage people to carry guns. So when you have psychopaths on campuses or psychopaths wandering into places, there is the ability to fight back, because as we all know, when seconds count, police are minutes away. And that was the case at the Florida State campus, because the police were there pretty fast. The first responders were pretty fast. But the real first responders, the students that were shot, the ones that confronted the evil initially, they were disarmed, they were unarmed, and unfortunately, they paid a high price for being disarmed and not able to fight back against the psychopathic scumbag. All right, so that's the first thing to keep in mind as to what happened yesterday in terms of the Second Amendment and President Trump. But beyond that, we saw a powerful statement, another powerful statement. We've seen several of these already from Harmeet Dillon, the attorney who was, I knew her in New York at a major law firm, and now she is, of course, a prominent attorney in California, and right now is the head of the Civil Rights Division, the Civil Rights Office in the Department of Justice, a very influential position just confirmed by the United States Senate. Harmeet Dillon is a great asset, not just to the Trump administration and not just to America, but in particular to the Second Amendment. And Harmeet Dillon, just to show you how aggressive she is, and I think this is fantastic news all the way around. We should be applauding this and encouraging this. She specifically on X laid out that one of the big things the Department of Justice is already starting to do is to look at these licensing divisions that have been dragging their feet on issuing concealed carry permits, which they're obligated to do under the Constitution, including the precedent of Nysurpa versus Bruin. This is, you have a fundamental right to be able to carry guns in public for self-defense. This is a no-brainer, but there are still agencies and law enforcement agencies out there, including the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, apparently, who are dragging their feet. And this is important because Harmeet Dillon out on X encouraged people to reach out to the Department of Justice's Office of Civil Rights to alert them to information that might be helpful in their investigation into these law enforcement agencies that are not respecting our Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. Here's what she had to say on X. She writes, quote, "Among the first initiatives of the Justice Department and the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department on Second Amendment issues is our investigation into lengthy waits imposed by the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department for concealed carry. If you have anything to share, Ray, the LA delays, please email the DOJ hotline above." And then she retweets or reposts a prior statement about the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, and that says the following. On March 27, 2025, the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice opened a pattern or practice investigation of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Pursuant to our authority under 34 U.S.C. 12601, this investigation will examine whether the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department engages in practices that unduly burden or effectively deny the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens, including by requiring them to endure lengthy wait times when applying for concealed handgun licenses. It goes on to say that anyone with information related to this investigation may contact the Special Litigation Section by emailing, and there's an email address there, and a phone number referring to the United States Department of Justice Special Litigation Section. Powerful stuff, folks. You have a presidential administration, for the first time in history, is literally asking Americans, if you see something, say something when it comes to violations of the fundamental right to keep and bear arms. It is about time that the Department of Justice is actually going to do its job when it comes to our Second Amendment rights. They have historically done things with voting rights and other civil rights, but they've never done it with respect to the most important civil right, the right to keep and bear arms. And I'm glad to see that this Department of Justice, under Donald Trump, under Pam Bondi, Harmeet Dillon and others, is laser focused on making sure that the right to keep and bear arms and our Second Amendment rights is on par with other fundamental rights. And as a side note, I actually was been working on an article for some time. I probably got to work harder to get this done. But just for anyone who's listening, the way I would go about investigating and proving that concealed carry offices are delaying and are costing too much money is if I were doing this investigation, I would basically compare and contrast the time and the money it takes to, let's say, register to vote versus getting your concealed carry license. Time it takes to get a driver's license with getting your concealed carry license. Do you see what I'm saying? You start comparing other things, getting a parade permit, right? Whatever it might be, start comparing how long it takes, like in Los Angeles, to get these other government documents. And then say, geez, it's interesting. It takes me, a day. It takes me 1 hour to get a temporary driver's license, and it takes me 2 weeks to get my formal fancy driver's license with my photo on it. And yet it's taking me months and months and months to get my concealed carry permit. And likewise, you do the same with the amount of money. If you can show that it costs, hundreds of dollars or maybe even thousands of dollars to get your concealed carry permit, but in that exact same jurisdiction, it costs you like $5 to get a driver's license and costs you no money to get the right to vote. You see what I'm saying? I would start to be comparing and contrasting both the wait times and the money spent between getting your concealed carry license and getting these other government-issued IDs, getting these other government-issued permits and the like. And that's how I would start setting up this case. By the way, as a side note, the way these systems ultimately should work is this. I apply for a concealed carry permit, and if I don't get, and as soon as I apply, I should have the right to carry. Just automatically, right to carry. And then the government can take as much time as it wants to investigate me. And if it turns out that I'm a prohibited person or otherwise disqualified, they have to reach out to me and let me know, hey, you can't carry a gun anymore because you're disqualified for whatever the reason is. But as soon as I apply, I should have the right to carry. And the benefit to that system, in my opinion, I apply, I have the right to carry, is you now have incentivized the government agencies that are responsible for doing these background checks on you. You've incentivized them to move fast. The current setup, which is you don't get to carry a gun until they act and issue a permit, incentivizes these anti-gun jurisdictions to go slow and make it expensive. If you say once they apply, they get to carry, you now have incentivized these anti-gun jurisdictions to do the background check fast. That is how this should ultimately be done. Again, I can't figure out everything for the Second Amendment movement, but that is the ultimate goal. That should be the gist of it. And of course, we all understand that really what we're talking about, this should be permitless carry all around the world, or I should say all around the country, for reasons we talked about. I mean, I don't need a permit to go to church, and I don't need a permit to speak. But again, I live in the real world, so that's not an option today. But what I just described in terms of these licensing arrangements is something that is available in the real world potentially. And I just throw that out there for you smart people in the Second Amendment movement to consider. And I should also mention this. The next major decision that's just occurred involving the Second Amendment involves moving the Overton window. Remember how we've talked about Overton window is a notion that says that what is sort of politically acceptable in a community, in the nation, whatever it is, and we want that Overton window to continue to move in favor of the right to keep and bear arms. And part of that is to make sure that people appreciate our history in preserving our fundamental pre-existing right to keep and bear arms. And the Trump administration just did exactly that, in basically issuing a proclamation by the president of that powerful, important moment in world history, the shot heard around the world, where the battle for the American Revolution kind of really starts. In the real kind of sense, there's other arguments you can make about the Boston Massacre and whatnot, but in the real sense, that shot heard around the world at the Battle of Lexington and Concord, of course, the 250th anniversary is right now, and President Trump acknowledged this with a presidential proclamation. Very great stuff, and it talks about the role of the militia, the role of the Minutemen, the role of the right to keep and bear arms. the fact that the American Revolution was really started over gun control because, again, the Brits left Boston to go to Lexington and Concord, not to rape and pillage the countryside, but to get the guns, the ammo, and the black powder. And that is exactly what the president says. Here's the proclamation. Very great stuff. This helps move the Overton window and remind Americans of our fundamental heritage about self-preservation, private gun ownership, and the right to self-defense. Here's what this presidential proclamation says from President Donald J. Trump. On the 250th anniversary of the battles of Lexington and Concord, proclamation by the President of the United States of America. 2.5 centuries ago, a small band of Minutemen answered the call of freedom in the legendary battles of Lexington and Concord, an epic tale of American strength and the first major armed conflict of the Revolutionary War. We honor the memories, remember the sacrifices, and summon the courage of every hero of liberty who gallantly shed his blood for the cause of independence on April 19, 1775. After years of intensifying frictions and escalating hostility between the British Crown and the American colonies, all avenues to peace and diplomacy had been exhausted, and it became clear to the patriots that war was inevitable. Following the Boston Massacre, the oppressive, intolerable acts, and the lasting grievance of taxation without representation, listen carefully, folks, the colonists began organizing militias as a final recourse in the defense of their right to self-government. When was the last time you saw a positive reference to militias in a presidential proclamation? And that's what you have here. But it continues on, folks, and here's what the proclamation continues to say. The British regime's reign of tyranny reached a breaking point when, in his fearless midnight ride from Boston, Massachusetts, Paul Revere announced the news that the Redcoats were marching to Concord, Massachusetts, to arrest colonial leaders and seize American arms. Hear that, folks? To arrest colonial leaders and seize American arms. The American Revolution was started over gun control. Seizing American arms, form of gun control. The proclamation continues. By the time they reached Lexington at dawn, the British encountered 77 intrepid American Minutemen, led by Captain John Parker, boldly standing their ground in their independence. That's right, listen carefully, folks. Boldly standing their ground in defense of their independence. Sounds like group defense to me, folks. 77 Americans standing together with guns, group defense. It's a constitutional right. Let's carry on. The surprised British fired a volley mortally wounding 8 American patriots, the very first American soldiers to lay down their lives for our emerging nation. It goes on to say, the British ambush at Lexington became known as a shot heard round the world, prompting thousands of brave young men to leave behind their homes and livelihoods to fight for our freedom on the front lines of the American Revolution, commencing the greatest fight for liberty in the history of the world. And the proclamation goes on and on. It talks about other militiamen. It talks about the militia. It talks about how the Patriots relentlessly pursued the Redcoats, ambushing them from behind the trees, walls, and cover as the Redcoats marched back to Boston, and so on and so on. Powerful stuff, folks. And again, the proclamation goes on with additional information. I'll put a link to it down below if you want to read the entire presidential proclamation by President Trump. And last but not least, breaking news here in the Peterson case, which is the issue involving whether or not suppressors are protected arms under the Second Amendment. You may recall that the Biden administration argued that suppressors were not arms under the Second Amendment and cannot be protected by the Second Amendment, and that a 3-judge panel with Judge Jennifer Elrod issued an erroneous decision, in my view, that suppressors are not protected arms and are not arms in the first instance, textually under the Second Amendment. I think that was clearly wrong. There's a petition right now for the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals down there in Mississippi, Texas, and Louisiana to hear the whole case again in front of the entire Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals and not just a 3-judge panel. And right now we are all waiting for the Department of Justice and the Trump administration to submit a document telling them what exactly is the Trump position on whether or not suppressors are arms and whether or not suppressors are protected under the Second Amendment's Bruin methodology. We have just found out in a public filing that the Department of Justice is asking for another 30 days because they are intensely considering what they're going to do in this case, I think this is good news because it's a sign that the normal status quo of just rubber stamping federal gun control laws and just rolling over and doing whatever the law says and ignoring the Second Amendment implications, I think that is the old way of doing business for both law and order conservatives as well as Democrats that hate guns, and the Trump administration is neither. So I think it's another good sign that great things are happening within the Department of Justice and within the Trump administration. But again, as we've said before, the history of the future is yet to be written. So ultimately, we'll see what gets filed in that Peterson case down there in the Fifth Circuit with that en banc petition as to whether or not suppressors are protected arms under the Second Amendment. But again, a lot of important stuff happening involving the Trump administration and the Second Amendment. I have to continue to bring this to your attention because there's so much going on. It's like drinking from a fire hose, trying to get this information out to you on a daily basis. Anyway, so there you have it. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure you follow me on X @4boxdiner. Don't forget to subscribe both to YouTube and Rumble. I look forward to talking to all of you again very, very soon here at the Four Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.